Good evening, boys and girls. We're going to read chapter 10 tonight. It's kind of a short chapter, but it's a very important chapter. So that's why I only want to read chapter 10 and not go on to chapter 11. Wyatt wants to say hi before and after the story, and then he's going to behave in between the stories. Here he is.
Oh, clown.
Say hi.
Hi.
Okay, here we go. Chapter 10. The family begins to starve. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. First came the snow. It began very suddenly one morning, just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by the window, he saw the huge flakes drifting slowly down out of the icy sky that was the color of steel. And everybody knows what the color steel or like metal is. Think about in the wintertime when we've seen our sky that color. By evening, it lay 4 feet deep around the tiny house, and Mr. Bucket had to dig a path from the front door to the road. After the snow, there came a freezing gale, that's like a wind, that blew for days and days without stopping, and oh, how bitter cold it was. Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made of ice, and every time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like a knife on his cheek. Inside the house, little jets of freezing air came rushing in through the sides of the windows and under the doors, and there was no place to go to escape them. The 4 old ones lay silent and huddled in their beds, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. The excitement over the golden tickets had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything except the 2 vital problems of trying to keep warm and trying to get enough to eat. There's something about very cold weather that gives one an enormous appetite. Most of us find ourselves beginning to crave rich, steamy stews and hot apple pies and all kinds of delicious warming dishes. And because we are all a great deal luckier than we realize, we usually get what we want, or near enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted because his family couldn't afford it. And as the cold weather went on and on, he became ravenously and desperately hungry. Both bars of candy, the birthday one and the one Grandpa Joe had bought, had long since been nibbled away. And all he got now were those thin, cabbagey meals 3 times a day. And if you guys don't know what cabbage is, have your parents look it up on YouTube or find an image or try to explain it to you. It's kind of smelly in my opinion, and I don't think it'd be very fulfilling, especially if that's all you eat every day. Then all at once the meals became even thinner. The reason for this was that the toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket worked, suddenly went bust and had to close. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but he had no luck. In the end, the only way in which he managed to earn a few pennies was by shoveling snow in the streets. But it wasn't enough to buy even a quarter of the food that 7 people needed. Let's count them. There's Charlie, Mrs. Bucket, Mr. Bucket, Grandpa Joe, Grandma Josephine, Grandma Georgina, and the other grandpa, what's his name? George? 7?
Grandpa George.
Whew, 7 people. Okay. The situation became desperate. Breakfast was a single slice of bread for each person now. Lunch was maybe half a boiled potato. Slowly but surely, everybody in the house began to starve, and every day little Charlie Bucket trudged through the snow on his way to school. He would have to pass Mr. Willy Wonka's giant chocolate factory, and every day as he came near to it, he would lift his small pointed nose high in the air and sniff the wonderful sweet smell of melting chocolate. Sometimes he would stand motionless outside the gates for several minutes on end, taking deep, swallowing breaths as though he was trying to eat the smell itself. "That child," said Grandpa Joe, poking his head up from under the blanket one icy morning. "That child has got to have more food. It doesn't matter about us. We're too old to bother with. But a growing boy, he can't go on like this. He's beginning to look like a skeleton." "Well, what can one do?" murmured Grandma Josephine miserably. "He refuses to take any of ours. I hear his mother tried to slip her own piece of bread onto his plate at breakfast this morning, but he wouldn't touch it. He made her take it back." "He's a fine little fellow," said Grandpa George. "He deserves better than this." The cruel weather went on, and every day Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner. His face became frighteningly white and pinched. The skin was drawn so tightly around his cheeks that you could see the shapes of his bones underneath because he got so skinny. It seemed doubtful whether he would go on much longer like this without being dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with the curious wisdom that seems to come so often to small children in times of hardship, he began to make little changes here and there in some of the things that he did. So, as to save his strength in the mornings, he left the house 10 minutes earlier so that he would walk slowly to school without ever having to run. He sat quietly in the classroom during recess, resting himself while the others rushed outdoors and threw snowballs and wrestled in the snow. Everything he did now, he did slowly and carefully to prevent exhaustion. Then one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face and incidentally feeling hungrier than he had ever felt before, his eye was caught suddenly by a piece of paper that was lying in the gutter, in the snow. The paper was of a greenish color. There was something vaguely familiar about it. So let's look at this picture. Charlie stepped off the curb, bent down to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw at once what it was. It was a dollar bill. Quickly, he looked around him. Had somebody just dropped it? No, that was impossible because of the way part of it was buried. Several people went hurrying past him on the sidewalk, their chins sunk deep in the collars of their coats, their feet crunching in the snow. None of them was searching for any money. None of them was taking the slightest notice of the small boy crouching in the gutter. Then, was it his? This dollar? Could he have it? Carefully, Charlie pulled it out from under the snow. It was damp and dirty, but otherwise perfect. A whole dollar! He held it tightly between his shivering fingers, gazing down at it. It meant one thing for him at that moment, only one thing. It meant food. See that word, food? Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving towards the nearest shop. It was only 10 paces away. It was the newspaper and stationery store, the kind that sells almost everything, including candy and cigars. And what he would do, he whispered quickly to himself. He would buy one luscious bar of candy and eat it all up, every bit of it, right then and there. And the rest of the money he would take straight back home and give it to his mother. Okay, next chapter, chapter 11, is called The Miracle. Do you know what a miracle is, Wyatt?
Yeah, it's like a good day.
A miracle is when something amazing happens. So there's a miracle that's getting ready to happen. We don't know what. Don't say anything, even if you think.
I think I know.
We'll figure it out. Okay, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to list one adjective to describe each character from the story. Give me an adjective that describes Charlie, an adjective that describes Grandpa Joe, and an adjective that describes Mike TV. You can list them in the comments. You can take a picture of your writer's notebook, or you can videotape yourself listing the adjectives. Remember, an adjective is a word that describes a noun, and a noun is a person, place, or thing, and these are people. So Charlie is, give me an adjective. Grandpa Joe is, Mike TV is, remember Mike TV is the one that had all the guns and was acting crazy. So enjoy this chapter because it's about to get very crazy. He found the dollar. He's going into the store to buy a piece of chocolate, but he's going to take the rest of the money home. And then a miracle occurs.
Bye.
We'll find out tomorrow evening what the miracle is. Take care of each other, guys. I miss you all very much. Bye-bye.